Demian Brady is Vice President of Research at the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, and Richard Stern is Vice President at Plymouth Institute for Free Enterprise. Richard, thoughts on President Trump touting his tax cuts?
Well, I think this is a fantastic win for the American public. Look, the One Big Beautiful Bill avoided $4 trillion of tax hikes that the American public would have faced. But, that's just the start of it. Beyond that, there's brand new tax cuts for building factories in America, no tax on overtime, things that frankly fix 100 years of sins in the U.S. tax codes, things that make it finally lucrative to invest in building factories and productive capacity right here in America.
Yeah, Damian, Democrats criticize the tax cuts, arguing they disproportionately benefit wealthy and corporations. Democrat National Committee Chair Ken Martin arguing in a statement that Donald Trump promised Americans lower prices, lower taxes, and bigger refunds, and what they have gotten instead, massive tax breaks for Trump and his wealthy friends, a reckless trade war that has hiked prices, and a deadly and costly taxpayer-funded war with Iran. Look, Damian, I don't recall Democrats worrying about inflation at all during Joe Biden's term, and inflation was worse. Gas cost more then. So what do you think brought about the change of heart?
Well, you have to look at who is taxed by the system that we have. Ronald Reagan brought in the first modern era of tax reform back in the 1980s. And since then, the tax code has grown much more progressive, meaning that the burden of income taxes have shifted to basically the top income earners, and roughly 30% of tax filers have no tax obligation because of the various tax credits that are included, deductions. And one of the biggest benefits that was included in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the new tax cut passed last year was a doubling of the standard deduction, which provides broad-based tax relief and saved a lot of time and compliance headaches as well for taxpayers all across the country.
Yeah, Damian, to that point, I think I saw a chart yesterday that said the top 1% of earners pay 45% of the taxes. The bottom 50% pay 2%.
It's wild.
Yeah, so you got to think about that when you hear these fair share arguments. How much do they really want to tax people? We didn't want a tax code that helps people on the lower end of the income to have breaks as they work their way up. We also want a tax code that rewards success and allows people to use their own money in a productive manner.
Yeah.
And switching gears, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Trump's tariffs could return by July after the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs earlier this year. He said, "We had a setback at the Supreme Court in terms of the tariff policy, but we will be implementing or conducting Section 301 studies, so the tariffs could be back in place at the previous level by beginning of July." I cover the Supreme Court. I'm sure the administration, after those oral arguments, had some sort of plan in place. They did not go very well. Richard, what could this mean for the economy?
Well, look, here's the thing. This is the headwind we're facing. Look, the tax cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill are great. They allow more growth. They let Americans keep more of the money. Tariffs, on the other hand, unfortunately, it looks like Americans paid virtually all of the tariff burden that was imposed last year. And if the administration imposes more tariffs, it's just going to come out of the pockets of hardworking Americans and American families. And, it's important to remember that more than half of the goods we import into the United States are goods used by our producers. Aluminum sheets used by Boeing to make airplanes and, all manner of other parts that are brought in to make American-made cars. So, truth be told, not only are American families suffering because of the tariffs, American manufacturers, American industry are being savaged by those tariffs. So, look, as far as I'm concerned, don't put more tariffs in, do more tax cuts.
Yeah, Damian, before we go, I got to ask you about this. So reports say that Democrat former Congressman Eric Swalwell, obviously he has officially resigned from Congress following allegations of sexual assault against him. But despite all of that scandal surrounding him, that the former congressman can still get his pension. According to the group you work for, the National Taxpayers Union, Swalwell would be eligible to receive a taxpayer-funded pension of roughly $22,000 per year when he reaches age 62. What do you think about this? And would he also still be eligible to get his government-provided health care?
If he's enrolled in a federal program like that, yes, he would. So there have been laws enacted in 2007 and 2012 that do limit cut-off pension for former members of Congress who are convicted of certain crimes, but these are generally related to corruption and perjury and disrupting an investigation. So that's one thing that Congress might want to look at, is expanding the list of crimes that would result in pension forfeiture, because we want good people, quality people, honorable people serving in Congress. And we've seen that, for example, Representative Corrine Brown from Florida was indicted and convicted for corruption, but then she ended up pleading to a lesser charge that left her pension in place. So we know that these pensions are important in the decision makings of these members of Congress.
And Richard, I don't think taxpayers, let's say these criminal probes continue to play out and Swalwell is convicted. I don't think taxpayers really want to be paying his pension. How likely would it be that members of Congress go ahead and add crimes to that law already on the books, or go ahead and look to limit their own pensions potentially in the future?
Well, I'd like to think better of them, but the truth is we've had decades and decades here of congressional ethics laws that stop good things from happening, that go after, frankly, the most minor and petty things you can imagine. But when it comes to insider trading, where members make millions of dollars, when it comes to violations like this, allegations of horrendous crimes, they don't do anything about it. So, I think we need more sunlight, we need more pressure from the outside. But this just is one more case study where Congress isn't held accountable, where the D.C. politicians and bureaucrats are taking advantage of Americans and taxpayers across the country, and they're not held to account for it. So, we need to talk about this story as much as possible, and I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah, I spent a decade working there in Washington, D.C. You still do it.
So good.
I have very little confidence that they will police themselves on this. All right, Demian, Richard, great to see you guys this morning.